there's a moment when there's a sound and the gravel is...
So everyone can spread out and sit down as they would like. I will raise the mic a little bit. Okay. Yeah, everyone, thank you for being here for this event on deep listening. Please gather around as you want to. There's more free space down here if anyone outside would like to sit down. The event is being live streamed, so that's why I'm looking over here too. There's a camera, which I have to make everybody aware of. So this event tonight is focused on deep listening. It's based on a project that I've developed here with the Serpentine and supported by Google Arts and Culture. And this is an application for your phone that you download. And then on your phone, you have a map of the park. And then there are 5 different locations of species through the environment. And then this augmented reality application for your phone, you can listen to species in new ways that you otherwise wouldn't be able to hear. So there are 5 locations in the park, and the app takes you there. And then it spawns this area using GPS of 25 meters that you walk around in. And then you can slow down or speed up time as you walk around in those locations. So here tonight, we're going to hear from Matt McCorkle, who's my collaborator on this project. And we're going to hear from a bat researcher, Kate Jones. That's very fascinating. I have invited her because it's, she will come speak as well. But she's also here because it's in this kind of time where a lot of our lives are really busy and we have all these quick technical media and we work from different project to project to project, especially as an artist and in kind of a gig economy. It's very fascinating to me how there are still people left that spent decades of their life researching one specific thing and really paying attention to other species and documenting them and listening to them. So she will present that. And then we have Himali down here, an artist and a writer, and she will read some of her own very poetic environmental text. But I will first introduce a little bit about this audio in the app that Matt will play. Matt McCorkle normally makes these very incredible audio installations in the Museum of Natural History in New York. And he goes out in landscapes and then collect and sources all the audio himself and then mix it together. And it's the same thing that I've been doing here in the park with different species. There are plants, insects, trees and birds that I've photographed and then sampled together into these new poetic worlds that you can experience in the app itself. But tonight is more for other people to share their work on deep listening. The app you can always use tomorrow or later if you want to, but it's to them to share their kind of work. So when Matt plays his audio, you can feel free to lie down, stand up, whatever you want to do, and experience the work. And that is the audio from the app itself, from these 5 different species. And they each have 3 different audio layers. So I don't want to say more right now. I just want to hear Matt's audio, and I'm going to leave this chair as we listen to it. And you can just relax and experience that. So yeah, thanks to Matt. And he will come up and explain for a couple of minutes how he works as an audio artist. And the reason that we've collaborated on this project is that we met in New York. We're part of this art technology incubator called New Ink. And we both have in common that we go to landscapes and sometimes embed ourselves there for months at a time and collect material. And then use that artistically to create new things, so it has this feeling of being location specific, being relating to a specific place, but then change it to emphasize specific new perspectives. So Matt will come up and talk about his method for a minute or two.
Hey y'all, how you doing? So that was pretty weird, right? A little bit. I'd love to open it up just to questions, if anybody has any. Otherwise, I can just talk. If anyone, questions? Okay. So I go out into the wild and I spend a lot of time out there, and I'll bring a recording system, usually 3 or 4, and I'll place them around at different spots. And a lot of times what I'll do is very pure soundscapes, so exact replicas of places. But what I find most interesting is using the textures that you find in nature and reworking them into a lot of different soundscapes that you heard here tonight. These were all put together very quickly, and they're all very different from one another, as you could tell. But it's interesting to use the textures of the natural world like Jakob does visually, but sonically as well. And you just get like these really beautiful pure tones out of it. You heard a loon in there, and just really, really beautiful. But it's interesting, and I'll also mix them with synthesizers as well, and you can put sounds into a synthesizer and play them like you would pitch up a bird and so on and so forth. But yeah, thank you all for coming and listening, and perfect. Thank you, Jacob. Yes.
And now we will hear from Kate Jones, who has the maybe, I don't know, opposite method of Matt. She's a bat expert. It's very fascinating. So she's an expert in listening to environments, listening to species. She will play back some bats and talk about why she's doing that and its meaning for all of us and what we can learn from it.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm really honoured to be here. This is my first time in a Slade-covered sound bubble, but maybe for you as well. So I'm Professor of Ecology and Biodiversity at University College London and London Zoo as well, excitingly. So I'm sorry for the people that are behind me. So I took inspiration from History of the World in 100 Objects, and I thought we could do, the life of bats in 16 sounds. So I'm going to tell you a little bit first about what bats are, and then we're going to talk about the sounds that they make. So bats are mammals, just like us. So they have fur, and they give birth to live young, and they have nipples. That's the definition of a mammal. Sorry, I'm a biologist. They live an extraordinarily long time. They're one of the longest lived mammals on the planet for their size. So they can range from about 2 grams, and they're called Bumblebee Bats, to 1.5 kilograms, which are these big fruit bats. And the small, the longest lived small one that we've ever found is over 40 years old. And a very similarly sized mammal, like a mouse or a rat, can live about 18 months. So they are extraordinary. And one of the reasons they live so long is because they have very low mortality, like things don't eat them because they fly, and they're incredibly cryptic, and they live at night. They, come out at night. So they're incredibly special animals, and I fell in love with bats when I was about 18. So I've been doing this for about 30 years now. So I'm very old, and B, my life has been understanding and trying to conserve bats on our planet. Now, there are about 1,400 species of bats in the world, and there are about 18 species in the UK. And in the park, there's about 7 or so, don't quote me. 7 species or 7 individuals. So bats live all over the world, apart from the poles. And I'm trying to look behind. I'm so sorry. This is quite weird. So they live all over the world, apart from the poles. And the most bats that you'll find are in the tropics in South America. So bats will eat lots and lots of different things. So most of them eat insects, and they're really good at controlling insects, and their pest control value is really, really high. So most of them eat insects, but some of them will eat pollen and fruit, and some will eat birds, which is good. And some of them will eat other bats, and 3 species will eat blood. So only 3 out of 1,400 species eat blood, and they're all in South America, not in Transylvania, as you may have heard. So bats find their way around with sound, and that's why I'm here, is to talk a little bit about the sounds that bats make. So bats use high-frequency calls that we can't hear. So they're incredibly hard to see because they're at night, incredibly hard to hear because they're completely out of our hearing range. And so that's mostly what attracted me to them, because they were they're very understudied and very underappreciated, but totally awesome. So they have this secret world, and we get to eavesdrop on this world occasionally, and we use all this special equipment to kind of listen in to bats. So the first thing I want to talk about in how bats use sound is why bats use sound. So bats use sound for 3 things, and I'm going to talk about those 3 things. So the first thing is to find their way round. So they use sound to navigate. So they use echolocation. So not all bats use echolocation, actually. Some fruit bats don't use that. So about 200 species don't echolocate at all, but the others do. And so they use pulses of sound to bounce objects off and to listen to the echoes as they come back. And so when bats are making these sounds, they make these high-frequency pulses, and I'm going to play you one of those, and I've slowed it down by 10 times. So this is 10 times higher normally, and I've slowed it down 10 times. And when you slow down sound, you lower the frequency, and so it comes into our frequency range. So I'm going to play you the first sound. Please, James, my beautiful assistant. So that was a nocturnal bat, and these bats are making an incredibly loud sound. So this sound in nature is like a massive disco. People don't talk about discos anymore, do they? Like a rave. I don't know, I'm so uncool, I can't really explain what that would be. But a really loud nightclub thing. So that's louder than that. So it's huge amounts of decibels, and they have to make their sounds that loud because they forage really high up in the sky, and they make these really, really loud sounds, which are quite low frequency for bats. So these are the ones of the lowest frequency that we have. And the thing is with sound is that it's, if you have a low frequency, it travels far. So if you think about elephants when they're make rumbling sounds, you can hear them for kilometers. So bats, this nocturnal bat is the same kind of thing. They use these low frequency sounds for a bat, and they travel a long distance, and they can see or hear quite far. So they make these loud sounds which are low frequency. Please play me the next one. So these are a myotis bat. It's actually Dorbenton's bat, which flies over the water. And they need a lot of information about their environment. So they have a long bandwidth, which means they start high and they end low. And it's like a click. So they have a lot of information fed back to them about the object they're trying to navigate around or just in front of the water. So they're using these kind of clicks, and they sound like birds, don't they? I bet you didn't expect that a bat to sound like that. So the sound I'm going to show you next, listen, I don't know, what's the word? Listen, what you're going to listen to next is a pipistrelle. Please play that. So these species are really, really common and are found very commonly in parks, and they'll forage just over the canopy, so inside trees. And these species are really maneuverable, and they need lots and lots of information about their environment. Please play the next one. So this one is my favorite. This one is really, really high frequency call. And it means it doesn't travel very far, this call, because it's so high frequency, and it attenuates in air really quickly. And it means that this bat can't see very far, see or hear. And it means that this bat forages for things in trees. So it maneuvers in trees and finds insects in trees. But because there's so much clutter, so many leaves and things for it to get confused with, it has developed a whole different system of echolocation called Doppler Shift. And I know that most of you won't have heard of that, but you do recognize it, because when a siren goes past you, it goes from high to low frequency, like that. So that's Doppler Shift. It means that the sound waves are pushing forward as it's coming, the object's coming towards you, and as it passes, the sound waves get lower frequency, longer. So the bat uses that system, amazing how it does that, but it uses that system to detect tiny moths fluttering. So it can tell those moths are moving against a really complex background. So that's incredible. So I'm going to play you two sounds, and you're going to try and tell me what the difference is between these. This is a greater horseshoe bat and a lesser horseshoe bat. Maybe play it again. Play it again. Any differences? Anyone?
The second one was more intense.
Do you want to say higher frequency? Very good. Amazing.
And intensity and frequency.
Absolutely. That's perfect. Are you an ecologist? So one is at a higher frequency than the other. So these can go up to 100 kilohertz, which is incredible. And the other ones that are at 80 kilohertz. So they split the environment up. And the frequency of the sound tells you what, it dictates what you can see, hear. So the frequency of the sound has to be equal to the size of the insect you're trying to find. So it means that the higher frequency ones can see tiny objects. So it's like seeing the leaves on the tree or just the tree. So they can split up the world in different, in different niches depending on the frequency. Okay, so what else do they do with sound? They try and find food. So bats hunt with sound. And I'm going to play you some echolocation calls from a Pipistrelle bat, which has found an insect. Play it again. Some technical difficulties. So it's getting closer and closer to the insect, and it needs more and more information about the insect. So it speeds up its call, and it ends with a kind of raspberries, like that. So the calls get really, really close, and it catches the insect. Can you play it again, please? I love that sound. It's my ringtone on my phone. So bats aren't just the only things out at night catching insects. Insects have learnt to listen for bats. So it's like a bat-insect arms race. So some moths can have developed ears on their abdomens, which means that they can listen to the echolocation calls. And when a moth hears a bat call, it will fold its wings up and drop out of the sky to avoid the bat. So the bat's also done a kind of counter-attack on that and will stop echolocating so the moth can't hear it. So there's like a real trade-off and an arms race between them. Some moths, some tiger moths, actually produce a sound that jams bat calls so that they can't actually, they get confused and miss the bat. So, miss the moth, sorry. And then this one example just blows my mind. So I told you that some bats eat fruit and pollen and nectar and pollinate plants. And so some plants have developed bat beacons. So they have modified their leaves so that they're like little reflectors. So as the bat comes past and echolocates on the plant, it beams the call back to the bat to say, come here, I've got loads of pollen and nectar for you as a reward for pollinating me. But I didn't actually think that because it doesn't look that way. That's what it says. So it's like a bat beacon, which is amazing. So plants have evolved to hear and to adapt to bats pollinating them, which I think is amazing. Okay, the final thing then, and this is my favourite thing, is bats use sound to communicate with each other like we do. And bats can sing to each other. And I have a sound which is produced by different species of Pipistrelle bats in the UK. And they're attracting mates and singing to each other. I don't know what they're saying, but it's brilliant. So those are beautiful, aren't they? You didn't think you'd hear bats singing tonight. So there's this other thing that happens with bats in that they roost in these big colonies, and mums leave their pups as they go out foraging. And there's one of the biggest caves in the world is in Bracken Cave in Texas. It's about 10 to 20 million bats in that cave. And the females roost separately, and they all go out foraging, control all the pests across the cotton crops. And they leave the pups in these creches with little helpers to guard them. And everybody thought for ages, about the bat biologists, which is about 5 people, but everybody thought, everyone thought for ages that there was lots of sharing of infants, and that the mums would feed any pup that came to it. But actually, really detailed studies revealed that the pups make individual calls to their mums, and the mums can recognise the pups in that massive, great big colony. So these are very complex, interesting calls and information that's being transferred. So how do we detect bats? How can you detect bats? Well, we have lots and lots of different sets of equipment that try to turn this sound down into something we can hear because they're so cryptic. And I've got one in my pocket actually. iPhone, but I have a special microphone that I plug in to the phone. Only a bat biologist would know this, but you can turn your phone into a bat detector, which is totally awesome and basically my dream come true. So you can listen to bats on your phone. Awesome. So unfortunately, Apple, all the other phone companies didn't think about bats when they were making the microphones for phones, which is very disappointing, to be honest. But a company has made a plug-in so that you can turn the sound down into something you can see, and you can see their calls on the screen. So if I went down to the lake in Hyde Park, we'd be able to hear bats as they come out, which is amazing. So the other the old kind of way that we did this was use these tunable radios, and they were really old-fashioned. You had to tune them to the bat call, and you have a really different sound, and I wanted to compare those two sounds for you so that you can really see the difference. So can you play those sounds in the first one, please, the nocturnal? So this is the nocturnal bat that I said was really loud and annoying and a bit like a rave. So the first one is what you heard before, and then you'll hear the one with the tunable rubbish bat detector. So in the trade, that's called a chip chop. Okay, the next one is a, what is it? Pipistrelle. That's the normal one. That's called a wet slap. No, it really is. Honestly, it really is called a wet slap. Okay, next one, meiotis. So this is the one you heard before. It's burning stubble. Okay, the next one is my favourite one. So this is the horseshoe bat. I'm laughing already. It's the same call, but recorded differently. Okay, why on earth do we listen to bats? What of use is it to man or beast? Now, why do we do that? So I just want to end finally then with why we do that. So I'm actually a mathematician, statistician. I know I don't look like that, but I am. And I use bat calls because bats leak information about themselves into the environment. They use it to find their way around, and they use it all the time at night. And I use that because I can monitor their populations. And we're going through one of the worst extinctions that our planet has seen. And there's a massive climate crisis. And I'm really interested in how to monitor and understand our environment better. And bats are a really good indicator species for that. And we can use their as an indicator of our environmental health, the population, the calls that they make, and I can work out with some clever maths how many there are. So I've been using machine learning and artificial intelligence to go through all these recordings and identify them to species and produce massive trend lines so that we can understand how our actions are impacting biodiversity and use that as a way to manage our planet better. So I just want to end then with a project I have in, I am monitoring the populations of wildlife in 4 countries in different biomes with WWF at the moment. And one of them is in Borneo. And we have acoustic sensors all over the rainforest, and we're looking at the impact of oil palm plantations on biodiversity. And this is from one of the largest fragments of wild forest there is in northern Borneo at the moment. And it plays for about a minute. So this is from one of our sensors that's solar powered. It's in the canopy. And it's 1 minute, but there's something that's very special that happens halfway through. Thank you very much. We were really excited when we heard that. The whole lab erupted. Thank you very much.
Singh, Soin, fantastic artist and writer, and she will read some of her words. I don't want to introduce it too much because I think your words are powerful in their own right.
Thank you. Just gonna do this that way. I chose two texts. One is a poem that I wrote, and another is a text by Annie Dillard from 1982. I thought it was just recent and not recent enough. And it starts with ice, and the second text goes to mangroves, and hopefully you'll see the kind of entanglements between these two very distant geographies. I chose a poem because it feels like metaphor or poetry provides a kind of passage and energizes what we feel is quite still and non-human, in this case, ice. So the poem is about this girl from the equatorial regions who finds herself in a polar landscape and feels very alien in it. So she goes about a kind of Ovidian transformation and becomes ice. And in becoming ice and in thawing then, she finds a kind of archive. So this is that poem. A very clear inverted mountain floating above the horizon. For historians, the present had lost itself over time. In eternity, there had been no shadows, echoes of no surface. Nobody left to be beautiful. The ghosts of what was to come exhaled. The ice said yes. The last frayed edges of what she knew had wilted. Her gelid, unfeeling fingers traced the tapering glaciers marbled with mud. She recognized that what had survived was ancient. She found fossils of ferns stamped in stones from way back when. Her own landscape had once been opposite like that. The ice moved through her for a few hours. A mineral messenger between the stone on which the man in the photograph sat boiling blubber and her own defeated breath. Bifurcated, she looked like a fjord. She'd take kidneys over the North Star and compasses over clocks. She'd take sadness over God. She'd take misdirection, indecision, intuition, the passive promise of wind over land. She'd take suspension over disbelief. She'd take the third person over you. Or when the sun and the moon are at rest, not rest like stillness, but the kind of rest in music, a string held taut, an interval with the pedal down. She'd take the confusion, the hysteria of light, the heft of its lurch sideways. The ice fortified her. Fronds of frost stung, spikes spreading like cables pushing signals through. Antennae attuned at frazzle frequencies. Beneath her turban, she could hear the grating ring of silence, the screech of crystals forming, futures foreseen, the tangle of tubular seaweed, the rinse of starfish with no hearts and double the hunger. The opacity leaked out of her blood and her bones, spectral. All the heat had dispersed. Her broken chronometer preserved in ice, still recording two types of error. The imperfection of the image exposed and the great distance it represented. When examined with a telescope, it proved to be our distance from one another. Presence felt like longing full of so much. Graves rose up to riot. Lichen shielded the stories from being burnt. A caterpillar died for 14 years, then woke with wings. The gloop of algae, the nets and straws and long-distance love letters congealed the ocean into a jungle. Gelatinous gossip. Shells spiraled into unbreakable brittle. The last frost frothed on a mangled eggshell. Phosphorescent flares. She went inside the boat, anchored never too close to shore. She was thawing, dripping afterlife. Still, a thin haze persisted. She was translucent. So now we go into a very different landscape of mangroves. And I won't say anything about this text because I feel like in the way that she describes the mangrove as a kind of floating island, the text also exists like this. And it kind of boomerangs us into this wildly existential space. It's called Sojourner. If survival is an art, then mangroves are artists of the beautiful. Not only that they exist at all, smooth-barked, glossy-leaved, thickets of lapped mystery, but that they can and do exist as floating islands, as trees upright and loose, alive and homeless on the water. I have seen mangroves, always on tropical ocean shores. There is the red mangrove, the yellow, the button, and the black. They are all short, messy trees, waxy-leaved, laced all over with aerial roots, woody arching buttresses, and weird leathery berry pods. All this tangles from a black muck soil, a black muck matted like a mud-sopped rag, a muck without any other plants, shaded, cold to the touch, tracked at the water's edge by herons and nosed by sharks. It is these shoreline trees which, by a fairly common accident, can become floating islands. A hurricane flood or a riptide can wrest a tree from the shore or from the mouth of a tidal river and hurl it into the ocean. It floats. It is a mangrove island, blown. There are floating islands on the planet. It amazes me. Credulous Pliny describes some islands thought to be mangrove islands floating on a river. The people call these river islands the dancers, because in any consort of musicians singing, they stir and move at the stroke of the feet, keeping time and measure. Trees floating on rivers are less amazing than trees floating on the poisonous sea. A tree cannot live in salt. Mangrove trees exude salt from their leaves. You can see it, even on shoreline black mangroves, as a thin white crust. Lick a leaf and your tongue curls and coils. Your mouth's a heap of salt. Nor can a tree live without soil. A hurricane-born mangrove island may bring its own soil to the sea. But other mangrove trees make their own soil and their own islands from scratch. These are the ones which interest me. The seeds germinate in the fruit on the tree. The germinated embryo can drop anywhere, say onto a dab of floating muck. The heavy root end sinks, a leafy plumule unfurls. The tiny seedling, afloat, is on its way. Soon, aerial roots shooting out in all directions trap debris. The saplings' networks twine, the interstices narrow, and water calms in the lee. Bacteria thrive on organic broth. Amphipods swarm. These creatures grow and die at the tree's wet feet. The soil thickens, accumulating rainwater, leaf rot, seashells, and guano. The island spreads. More seeds and more muck yield more trees on the new island. A society grows, interlocked in a tangle of dependencies. The island rocks less in the swells. Fish throng to the backwater, stilled in snarled roots. Soon, Asian mud skippers, little 4-inch fish, clamber up the mangrove roots into the air and peer about from periscope eyes on stalks, like snails. Oysters clamp to submersed roots, as do starfish, dog whelk, and the creatures that live among tangled kelp. Shrimp seek shelter there, limpets a holdfast, pelagic birds a rest. And the mangrove island wanders on, afloat and adrift, It walks teetering and wanton before the wind. Its fate and direction are random. It may bob across an ocean and catch on another mainland's shores. It may starve or dry while it is still a sapling. It may topple in a storm or a pitchpole. By the rarest of chances, it may stave into another mangrove island in a crash of clacking roots and mesh. What it is most likely to do is drift anywhere in the alien ocean, feeding on death and growing, netting a makeshift soil as it goes, shrimp in its toes and turns in its hair. We could do worse. I alternate between thinking of the planet as home, dear and familiar stone hearth and garden, and as a hard land of exile in which we are all sojourners. Today I favor the latter view. The word sojourner occurs often in the English Old Testament. It invokes a nomadic people's sense of vagrancy, a praying people's knowledge of estrangement, a thinking people's intuition of sharp loss. For we are strangers before thee, and sojourners. Our day on the earth are as a shadow, and there is none abiding. We don't know where we belong, but in times of sorrow it doesn't seem to be here with these pansies and witless mountains, here with sponges and hard-eyed birds. In times of sorrow, the innocence of the other creatures, from whom and with whom we evolved, seems a mockery. Their ways are not our ways. We seem set among them as among lifelike props for a tragedy or a broad lampoon on a thrust rock stage. It doesn't seem to be here that we belong, here where space is curved, the earth is round, we're all going to die, and it seems as wise to stay in bed as budge. It is strange here, not quite warm enough, or too warm, too leafy, or inedible, or windy, or dead. It is not, frankly, the sort of home for people one would have thought of, although I lack the fancy to imagine another. The planet itself is a sojourner in airless space, a wet ball flung across nowhere. The few objects in the universe scatter. The coherence of matter dwindles and crumbles towards stillness. I have read and repeated that our solar system as a whole is careering through space toward a point east of Hercules. Now I wonder, what could that possibly mean, east of Hercules? Isn't space curved? When we get there, how will our course change and why? Will we slide down the universe's inside arc like mud slung at a wall? Or what sort of welcoming shore is this east of Hercules? Surely we don't anchor it there and disembark and sweep into dinner with our host. Does someone cry, "Last stop, last stop"? At any rate, east of Hercules, like east of Eden, isn't a place to call home. It is a course without direction. It is out. And we are cast. These are enervating thoughts and thoughts of despair. They crowd back unbidden when human life as it unrolls goes ill, when we lose control of our lives or the illusion of control, and it seems that we are not moving toward any end but merely blown. Our life seems cursed to be a wiggle merely and a wandering without end. Even nature is hostile and poisonous, as though it were impossible for our vulnerability to survive on these acrid stones. Whether these thoughts are true or not, I find less interesting than the possibilities for beauty they may hold. We are down here in time where beauty grows. Even if things are as bad as they could possibly be and as meaningless, then matters of truth are themselves indifferent. We may as well please our sensibilities and, with as much spirit as we can muster, go out with a buck and wing. The planet is less like an enclosed spaceship Earth, than it is like an exposed mangrove island, beautiful and loose. We, the people, started small and have since accumulated a great and solacing muck of soil, of human culture. We are rooted in it. We are bearing it with us across nowhere. The word nowhere is our cue. The consort of musicians strikes up, and we in the chorus stir and move and start twirling our hats. A mangrove island turns drift to dance. It creates its own soil as it goes, rocking over the salt sea at random, rocking day and night and round the sun, rocking round the sun and out toward east of Hercules.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. I will take the microphone up. I also forgot to thank Kate before, and it's very fantastic that there are people like that spending that amount of energy and time studying specific species and sharing that. I will do a little reading as well, and then after that, Matt will play some more audio. I'm going to read a short text from a book called A Strange Bird by an author that I like. His name is Jeff Vandermeer, and he's written this book about a bird that escapes from a laboratory, and then it's the first time that it encounters the outside world. And I think similar, like Kate says, that bats are entering these new ecological conditions, that they are entering new worlds that they haven't seen before. So I will read a little text, and then Matt will play his audio. So this chapter is called The Escape. The strange bird first thought was of a sky over an ocean she had never seen, in a place far from the fire-watched laboratory from which she emerged, cage smashed open, but her wings miraculous, unbroken. For a long time, the strange bird did not know what sky really was. As she flew down underground, corridors in the dark, evading figures that shot at one another, did not even know that she sought a way out. There was just a door in a ceiling that opened, and a scrabbling and scribbling with something rat-like after her. And in the end, she escaped, rose from the smoking remnants below. And even then, she did not know that the sky was blue or what the sun was, because she had flown out into the cool night, the air, and all her wonder resided in the points of light that blazed through the darkness above her. But then the joy of flying overtook her, and she went higher and higher and higher, and she did not care who saw or what waited her in the bliss of the free fall and the glide and the limitless expanse. Oh, for this was life, then she had not yet been alive. The sunrise that blazed out from the horizon across the desert, against the wall of searing blue, blinded her, and her surprise made the strange bird drop from her perch on an old dead tree to the sands below. For a time, the strange bird kept low to the ground, wings spread out, frightened of the sun. She could not feel the heat of the sand, the itch of it, and sense the lizards and snakes and worms and mice that lived down below. She made her way in fits and starts across the desert floor that had once been the bed of a vast sea, uncertain if she should rise for fear of being burned into an ember. Was it near or far? Was it a searchlight from the laboratory trying to find her? And still the sun rose, and still she was weary, and the air rippled and scorpions rustled out, and a longing thing upon a distant dune caught a little creature that hopped not far enough, away from the air, smelled the cinders and salt. Am I in a dream? What would happen if I leapt up into the sky now? Should I? Even as under the burning of the sun, her wings seemed to grow stronger, not weaker, and her trailing passage grew bald, less like a broken wing and more like a willful choice. The pattern of her wing against the sand, like a message she was writing to herself, so she would remember. But remember what? The sound of the patter of paws kicking up and sand through the strange bird into a panic, and she forgot her fear of the burning orb and flew off into the air, almost straight up, 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 and up. And no injury came to her, and the blue enveloped her and held her close. Circling back over the passage, against the wind, taxing the strength of her wings, she spotted the two foxes that had been sniffing her trail. They looked up at her, and yipped and wagged their tails, but the strange bird wasn't fooled. She dive-bombed them once, twice, for the fun of it, and watched them yelp and look up at her with an injured look in their eyes, even though behind it lay a cold gleam and ravenous smiles. Then she wheeled high again and, taking care not to look directly into the sun, headed southeast. To the west lay the laboratory, where they had done such beautiful, such terrible things. Where was she headed then? Always to the east? Always veering south? For there was a compass in her head, an insistent compass pushing her forward. What did she hope for? To find a purpose and for kindness, which has not yet been shown to her. Where did she wish to come to rest? A place she could call home, a place that was safe, a place where there might be others of her kind. Thank you. Okay, thank you. That was Matt's recordings. He played that audio for me, and it in his studio, and it completely blew my mind. And then we became friends. And I invited him to do this. It's as I remember, it's a family of whales that you paddle humbags, and a calf. Yeah, a few calves that he recorded this for 2 weeks from a canoe in Hawaii, and then made this mix and played it, and I think it's very beautiful. Thank you, and thank you everybody.